Did did he say while gardening or did he say in the garden?
I believe he described it as a gardening mishap, which
Okay.
I'm hoping was a Spinal Tap reference.
Oh,
Right?
that would
Wasn't
make
it
actually I would
stumpy?
start. Yes, I think that makes me like Brian May more.
If he knew what he was doing when he was making
I
the
feel
reference.
like, I mean, as much as he's made me mad lately, I feel like he's got a sense of
Sure.
humor, right?
No, I mean, I hold out hope that you guys can reconcile.
I think it'd be good if we could.
Yeah, I think it'd be wonderful.
Hmm. I think I could have a cat named Brian May. It seems like a cat name.
It's just it's a weird.
Okay, you're giving me all this shit, but you wanted to name your cat Tilda Swinton.
Right, and I would refer to
So
her
you're
as Tilda
just
Swinton,
right.
like full name all the
You
time.
are just as guilty of said putting pressure on said animal and lots to live up to.
True. I don't.
So
I feel like Sid Vicious is
blame
a
me
higher
for
bar
my.
than Tilda. Sid Vicious is a higher bar than Tilda Swinton,
You think?
and she
I
was
think
great
they're
in
two
My Whole
different
Life.
bars. I
Right.
think they're two different bars.
Oh yeah, no.
They're
Tilda
probably not the
Swinton's
same
bar is
bar.
very wavy and
Right.
yeah, a little off there.
Right.
I don't know.
How about Gordon Sumner? That's a good dog
Oh,
name.
that's a good one. Yeah, Cherry Vanilla.
I know, Cherry Vanilla would be awesome.
My wife, one of her coworkers has a cat named Susan.
Oh, that's a cute cat name.
And maybe it's just this idea of giving animals like real human names that you could conceivably name a child or something else.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I think that's where it gets weird. Like no one is going to be naming their child Tilda Swinton. Right.
They might.
That I didn't have any say in. I had zero say in that.
I know, but they might though.
Tilda Swinton or Claire Huxtable.
Well, Claire Huxtable would be good too.
Because she did nothing wrong.
This is Why, with your hosts, Heidi Hedquist and Luke Poling.
I do like 16 Candles. I don't dislike The Breakfast Club. It's just not my favorite. I think it's because at the time, there wasn't a girl character I could relate to.
Mm.
Not that there isn't the other ones either. I related to Callie LeBrock. So that was my favorite.
For most people, there's somewhere between a Molly Ringwald and an Ally Sheedy. Nope. You go straight to Miss Don't Hate Me Because I'm Beautiful.
100%.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I'm trying to find a nice way to say this. That makes sense. That seems on brand for you.
Right? It is on brand. I think that's a very nice way to say it. It's perfect.
Wow. Even at the time, you were just like,
oh, yeah.
Yeah. Wade and what was the other one's name?
Wyatt.
Right? Wyatt. That's right. Yes. And then
we should try to find Wyatt.
Was it Gary? Was that Bill Paxton?
No. Okay. Wait. Gary. It was Gary and Wyatt. Chet.
Yes.
Chet was Bill Paxton, but it was Gary and Wyatt. Anthony Michael Hall was Gary, and the other dude who we should interview was Wyatt.
Right. Is it Ian? Elon Michael Smith?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay, let's see. He's a professor now?
Even better.
Wow, he received his AB, which I'm not exactly. What does that stand for? Do you know?
His AB, not his BA.
No, it's. I mean, maybe it's a.
Is it a?
I can't believe that Wikipedia would be wrong, but
a typo
in medieval studies from University of California, Davis, his MA in medieval studies from Fordham, received his doctoral degree from Texas A&M. As of January 2020, he's an associate professor in the English department at California State University, Long Beach.
Okay, we can find him.
Imagine if we could talk to him about weird science and medieval history,
right? And about the plague. About the plague. Like, how does this relate to the last plague? Like, is it better? Yes. Is it worse?
Was Naked and Afraid your first job in
Yeah.
this field, or were you doing this for a while before then?
Well, I've been in print design all my life. I grew up in a print family. We owned a newspaper, so I'm a third generation newspaper publisher. I guess I didn't publish a newspaper. I published my own tabloid, actually tabloid, off of our press for about 6 years. And then, newspapers kind of took the back seat, and we ended up, as most small newspapers, getting absorbed by a bigger corporate conglomerate as the advertisers started dropping off. And I dipped out and went and retrained myself for motion design for television. And, so I do effects now in motion design. Naked and Afraid was my first job out of my new training. So I went back and retrained myself for about a year, and I got a certificate degree through Video Symphony in Burbank, California. And I was offered the job with Naked and Afraid prior to graduating, and I could have jumped in about 6 months earlier, but I wanted to finish up my schooling. It was really important to me. On the first interview I had, I think it was, probably the third question, but they're like, how do you feel with nudity? How do you do with nudity? I'm like, I don't, so they're like, they wanted to know what you thought, can you work with nudity, or what your thoughts were. I was like, that's fine, as long as there's a paycheck, I'm good.
Right. It was the third question of the interview.
Yeah, because they want to know if you can do the work,
That's a good point. Sure.
Yeah.
And they were like, okay, it's kind of like, if you're going to be offended, or if this is going to be something that you can't see day in and day out, or function with, or if there's a problem at home, it's nudity. It's nudity. And at the same time, and you have to be, with this show in particular, it's, there's a lot of securities around it, obviously.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
So, so yeah, it was interesting. But yeah, they wanted to know, are you okay with nudity? I was like, sure. I kind of knew what I was getting into.
Yeah, it's like kind of in the title.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. So
I mean, that's not like, all jokes aside, like, that is a very important job on that show. And that is a very big, quote unquote, first job.
it is. It was a little weird. And however, I'll tell you about how important the blurring is for Naked and Afraid. The producers quite literally, there's story, there's footage, but with the nature of the show and being a semi-family show on Discovery, the blurring was what was going to make it or break it. And other shows had done it, and they had really terrible compositing. And so the blurring process in Naked and Afraid was a process that a few people that worked on the show developed. We all developed it over a period of about 6 months. When by the time I came in, they had already had some techniques, and then we just kept fine tuning it. The post producer, Marco Jolson, he basically, his mandate was, I want them to look like Barbies. So our mandate was to make the blurs non-egregious. So basically, the viewer needed to not be distracted by the blurring.
Right.
And the producers later on would tell us that is one of the hallmarks that made the show a success and made it viable and airable. And because the blurs were so, sometimes we had a bunch of different artists, but if done right, they would be non-distracting.
Right. And it really is, when you see the footage and stills sort of prepping for this, you do have to kind of look twice to sort of see, are they actually, it's very, very well done. When in the process of cutting the show does the blurring come in? Do they worry about the story and the arc of the episode, and then you guys come in? Because like you said, you're working with sensitive footage. This is something that somebody's not going to say, yes, I want this on TV. So where in the process, since again, in the process of putting together a show, footage is being sent to a bunch of different people and a bunch of different departments are weighing in on it. Where do you guys get the footage?
So we come in what's called the online phase, which is the last phase of post-production. So because the job of blurring is difficult, it's tedious, it's time consuming, and it's extremely important for the show. Basically, they go out and shoot, they put it in the can, they ship it back, then the AEs go through it, they label everything, the editors start, the story producers start, they start stringing out episodes, they get the episodes done. And as you know, so when they get into a final cut phase is when they would start sending us the footage to blur, because it's extremely important for us not to blur footage that, I mean, for process and for cost of production, you don't want the artist blurring something that won't air.
Right.
So basically, we are kind of next to the last step of post-production.
Yeah.
So you often hear with gynecologists, right? You know, the whole joke of you've seen one vagina, you've seen them all. Did it ever get to that point with all those naughty bits in front of you?
So yeah, I mean, so the job is to blur the naughty bits. Yeah, I mean, after a while, it becomes very mechanical.
Right, I would imagine.
You know, and I'll be honest with you, it's like, let's say you know, yeah, it's like you've seen one, you've seen them all. You know, some, you know, and as blur artists, you know, it's like you're generally trying to get the job right. So after a while, the nudity kind of just dissipates into the background, and you're focused on the pixels. And so after time, I mean, yeah, basically it's like it's just a job. And yeah,
Right.
over time it was like, oh, you know, we were more frustrated about the challenges of the work than like worried about what the work was. But yeah, it became, and then for me, like I wasn't, you know, shocked or anything by nudity, and you know, so it wasn't a big deal for me. I think some artists would come in and it was challenging for them. You know, seeing the nudity, some people, you know, but yeah, I'll tell you a funny little thing though. So yeah, you've seen one, you've seen them all. If you're blurring nudity, it's a job, and yeah, it's just you know, it's really not a big deal. Yeah, this is what's funny though is, you know, you see this person come in and it's like their entry shot, and they're running on the beach, and they're fresh out of, you know, whatever, they're all rested and, you know, freshly nude, they just took their clothes off and they're probably showered, and after about 3 days they all start looking the same. Like,
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh.
there's no, if someone was attractive, like their first shot, run down the beach, you know, after a few days, it's like it's everything all, you know, it's all over.
Yeah. I would imagine no matter how free spirited you are, you would be happy for that blurring after 3 days. You wouldn't want
Exactly.
anyone to know what it looked like.
Yeah, you know, and yeah, with the, you know, with the you know, the vaginas, or you know, the naughty bits for females, like that's a little bit easier to blur, because you know, it's you make it look like a Barbie a little bit easier. There's nothing flying around or moving
True.
around. So you'll have to like compensate your tracking, you know, so that was probably the easiest bit
Right.
to work on.
Yeah.
But
the 10 bits would be hard.
Yeah.
No
But,
pun
you
intended
know,
again.
as an artist, yeah, I mean, you see some rather unattractive angles.
Well, I was going to say that's the other thing. Like, it's not all, like you said, glamorous running down the beach shots. There's a lot of crouching and bending and things that,
absolutely,
like you said, nobody can make super attractive.
Yeah, you know, I mean, these people are surviving, and the thing about Naked and Afraid is they're really out there surviving, and you know, and a lot of these people are experts. And the one thing about the show is it's real. You know, these people are surviving, they're doing their best. It's a competition for them, and you know, I will say, out of all the reality television on the planet that I've seen or worked on, you know, Naked and Afraid's legit. It's a legit show. Yeah.
It lives up to the title.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're quite literally, these people are, if they're not ready for this stuff and they're challenging, they're having hard times out there. I can't even imagine. I've
Right.
watched 60, 70 and Blurred and all these episodes of Naked and Afraid, and not one of them makes me feel more comfortable about going out into the outdoors. I'll tell you what.
Yeah, right. I mean, why
Yeah.
do you think people want to be on the show?
I think that people want to be on the show because there's people that are exhibitionists and they're just like, hey, and then there's people that are real survival people. I think what ended up being, the main success of the show is there are people that are survivalists, and this challenge to them is next level. So they can and a lot of these people, like the real survivalist outdoor, bushcraft people, they just see it as a next level challenge. They're like, okay, because you don't get to start with shelter. I mean, it's basically just bare bones, bare body. Like,
Literally, yeah.
Yeah.
know? And so they see it as this great challenge. And I believe for a lot of them, they gain, the get, because there's no money involved, is that respect amongst their community.
Hmm.
But yeah, they would bring people in that were kind of survivalists, and, so sometimes they do good, sometimes they do bad. But in the end, or even midway through the show, I mean, like I said, you get on there, these people get on there, and if you watch the episodes, you see the digression of everything,
Yeah.
character, patience,
Right.
and I mean, they go through it all. So it was, I don't know, it's a lot of fun to work on.
How often or how soon into watching the
Oh,
footage do you go, this person's not going to cut it?
so we never really knew the storyline as the blur artist. So we would, so I'd make up my own story as I went along. So we never really knew the success. And eventually, when we started doing the PSR graphics and things like that, we would see the scoring and kind of know how well they're doing and things like that. But um, I could kind of tell through the footage. So basically, I was like, as I was working, because I wasn't in story, or sometimes we were close to the story editors, and I'd meet
Right.
editors, and I would go into the bay and like maybe see some of an episode, but I didn't really know what the outcome was. I just knew how bad people started looking.
Right.
You could tell they're like hurting, but I never really knew the outcome until it went to air.
Wow.
What what kind of stories were you making up? Was it like free-spirited dental hygienist who has a car breakdown? Like, what's the kind of story you guys are creating?
Well, so I'm working on a shot, let's just say, of somebody like dismantling a crab that they caught, and it's this thing, and they're dismantling it in front of their boobs or something, and so I'm like, okay, so they got food, they're,
Right.
like, or I
Yes.
can tell by the weight loss, they're super hungry, they're probably, very desperate right now, but I wouldn't make up stories like, it's just basically like I would try to figure out if they were going to drop out, or and how, like, through the blur shots, like what if they were going to win, or if they were going to not win, or but I never really knew the end result
So it
until.
wasn't like
Yeah.
Prince fighting with father trying to win his love by no.
No, 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 no.
Okay.
I'd
No,
try to
that's fine.
figure out where they had been based on the shots, because they weren't always in sequence. So I'd be like, okay, is this earlier in the show, and then they're a little cleaner here, and they look a little more refreshed? Is this before or after
Gross.
this last shot of them catching food? So I would try to basically piece together the storyline that the story editors were piecing together themselves, and the editors. So that's kind of what I was talking about. I wouldn't be like,
Okay.
oh, she's, gonna, meet up with a unicorn.
Right.
They're gonna run off into the woods and catch a couple snails and come back. That's target. It wasn't so much
Right.
like that. Like, the job of blurring is monotonous.
Imagine.
It's challenging. It's time consuming. Um, so that for that reason, it was hard to maintain people and to have people stay, because there's a lot of rotoscoping. We can talk about the process. So basically, you have to be very patient to be a blur artist. You have
Yeah.
to be okay with just basically rotoscoping and tracking, and Yeah, so a lot of the time it's very technical and it's very tedious.
So we should actually, you're right, we should explain rotoscoping. That's when you're selecting in part of the image,
Yeah,
highlighting it, or in this case, blurring it, and then moving forward almost frame by frame and readjusting that blur as necessary. Correct?
absolutely. So let's
Okay.
say the blur artist's job is extremely challenging on Naked and Afraid. And the reason that is because you have naked people, and the job is to blur out the naughty bits. Now, the reason we used rotoscoping in Naked and Afraid was because to make the blurs as seamless as possible, if someone's, let's say, you have to say someone's working on something, they're weaving a basket to catch fish, and they're doing it in front of their naughty bits, we would have to literally rotoscope out all of the fingers and the hands and all of that, and then recompose that back over the blur.
Jeez
Right.
Louise.
So that's why the Naked and Afraid is such a phenomenon and it's doing so well, is because I mean you'll have like a blurred, boobs, but you'll still be able to see what's going on in detail. And there's not just a blur over the hands all willy-nilly. I mean,
Right.
I've spent on one shot, this shot in particular, I spent probably close to 6 to 8 hours just rotoscoping the hands and the fingers. And I remember nights where I would be there all night up until like 1 in the morning to get a shot done for like a promo piece or something. And it was like they wanted this real specific shot. I obviously remember this shot very well.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was literally like frame by frame, cutting out each individual finger because you can't create these roto masks in complicated means, because after a while because the finger dips behind and so
Yeah.
it's very extremely tedious and detail orientated. So we would have to rotoscope the arms, the fingers, the hair, anything that would come in front or over of the naughty bits.
Right.
So, and then at the same time, we'd have to do a lot of compositing. In like, we came up with a luma key technique for like, let's say they're running through the jungle, and they go behind a tree. Well, that even though they're behind a tree, a boob could pop out in between some leaves, and all of a sudden there's
Yeah.
Yeah, it happens to all
that
of us.
one frame. So early on, we had a gentleman by the name of Adam Burns, and his job, he was, I think, associate post producer or something. He would have to watch through every frame of every episode and make sure that there was no nudity, you know. So and that's our note passes, because we're blurring stuff, and sometimes we would, we'd like miss a frame, because our jobs are so in depth. I mean, we're looking at like leaves, and like sometimes
Right.
photo have to rotoscope out a leaf. But then what we did is we created other techniques like this luma key technique, where we could luma key out the green and recomposite that back over top, after we blur. So Naked and Afraid, the job of the blur artist is technically a compositor job. It's
Hmm.
extremely complex, and in television, probably, like other compositors, there's all these different levels of composite, right? You've got your motion picture compositors, and you've got your like television effects compositors, kind of like I am. That's what I specialize in. And then there's a blur compositor. That,
Right.
yeah, so it's extremely, so we do a lot of tracking. So we'd use Mocha to track and rotoscope. But when it came down to getting a good track on certain things, we'd like exhaust every possibility. Sometimes you get a good track, sometimes you don't.
Did you have to use specific language? Like, did you have to refer to parts as certain parts? Did you have to use technical terms or?
Yeah, we there were all kinds of funny different little things that, we would name, bits and pieces.
That's what I hoped for.
Because we'd all be going stir crazy in there, so we'd start making up stuff. And but yeah, for the most part, it wasn't really a part of the conversation. Nip slip, that was the nip slip, because that
Right.
would be in post, like, oh, there's a nip slip, that would be a note for us, like, oh, shot 50012334, has a nip slip in it. That would be like one of our notes, and we have to go try to find that. You know, but yeah, I mean, off the top of my mind, I can't remember too many. I think.
Yes, you can. I can see it in your
Yeah.
face.
Uh,
You're
I
holding back. Come on.
I think
Just
I
tell us
prefer
one.
the chinchilla, someone that hasn't shaved,
All right.
like
Fair.
a male that hasn't shaved,
Yeah.
like there's like a dirty rat hanging around,
That's
Um,
what I needed.
yeah.
Did anybody ever get in touch with you asking that their blur be bigger, just for
Absolutely.
simple?
Yeah, I mean, we have like, some of because most of the stuff had already been filmed, and then they would bring back in like certain talent, or the survivalists would come back in, they'd be in the office, and sometimes we'd be working on their episode, and it was very awkward. You got someone,
Right. Hey.
hey, bro, like,
How
Nice
do
to
we
meet you.
really
Oh, we've
look?
met. Yeah.
Yeah.
and now you're standing right here. It's a little weird, but
Yeah.
it'd be like, hey, yeah, make the blur a little bit bigger. Can you do that? That
Uh-huh.
happened more than once.
I was gonna say that must have been a frequent.
Right.
And they weren't joking, were they?
No, they were like, make
No. Yeah.
sure.
Right. Now, you've since gone on, just looking at your resume, you're working on the arrangement for E, and it sounds like you've been consulting and working on a bunch of other shows. Has there ever been a job you've had since Naked and Afraid that was more challenging and more specific on just every single episode? There is a lot of work to be done before this is ready for broadcast.
You know, because I was, fortunate enough to cut my teeth on Naked and Afraid. Yes, I mean, I've gone on to work on several shows and shots and footage for several shows where I have very difficult challenges in compositing. Um,
Mhm.
so the answer is yes. There wasn't nudity so much, but I've done a lot of background removal. I've
Mhm.
had shots in the last couple years where I had to remove people's shadows like off of like random walls. I do a lot of that type of work where I make things go away. Like make
No, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And now you guys, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, it might have been in jest. It's hard to say when in those
Right.
situations. But I quite literally had more than one request to make it work bigger.
Now, I know you guys were termed the Blur Man Group.
Yeah,
Was that a self definition, or was that something someone else on the
so
production team gave you guys?
the Blurman group was, I think we kind of came up with that name. We were, the team, we were pretty proud, of our work going into like year three, and we ended up, there was an interview with Playboy, and I believe we just kind of needed a catch. We would have like little parties and office parties and things like that, and everyone would start loosening up a little bit. And we'd kind of come up with little catchphrases, but we came up with the name Blurman Group. I think was originally for that article. It was kind of just they needed some type of like something to call us.
Hmm.
So it was just a catchy little like tongue-in-cheek thing we came up with.
Right. Now, you've since gone on, just looking at your resume, you're working on the arrangement for E, and it sounds like you've been consulting and working on a bunch of other shows. Has there ever been a job you've had since Naked and Afraid that was more challenging and more specific on just every single episode? There is a lot of work to be done before this is ready for broadcast.
You know, because I was, fortunate enough to cut my teeth on Naked and Afraid. Yes, I mean, I've gone on to work on several shows and shots and footage for several shows where I have very difficult challenges in compositing. Um,
Mhm.
so the answer is yes. There wasn't nudity so much, but I've done a lot of background removal. I've
Mhm.
had shots in the last couple years where I had to remove people's shadows like off of like random walls. I do a lot of that type of work where I make things go away. So it's like fix it in post,
Right.
Right.
fix it in post. It's one
Yes.
of my things. So yeah, and that's on just the compositing side, and that's like kind of compositing is different than designing. I'm a designer first.
Okay.
I'm a trained and experienced compositor. I believe that because I'm a regular artist and I paint and I have always done that all my life, and then having started designing advertising at a very young age, I so my design was there first. I my first schooling, I went to the Art Institute in the '90s, and I studied everything to be a publisher, and I helped move along our family business into the digital age. So I was already like very much of a designer and technical. So yes, like any composite job, depending on what the ask is extremely difficult. They never really get easy. Some are easier than others, but they're all challenging in their own way. They all have their own beast. Now, so I would say that the job doesn't necessarily get easier. My techniques get better, and but things take time. I've got faster at work, which is I'm extremely efficient. Then there's and from that point I've gone back to being a designer, and most recently over at Fox I was art director for some of their social media stuff. And so that job, so on the designer side, that's probably more difficult than it's a different type of pressure. So as a designer, you're working with art directors, you're developing looks of things, say for these show packages and that I get called in to do, they bring me into and I design their look. So there's a process and a lot of pressure behind that as well. I generally am more that's it's more stressful, the design side of it, depending on deadlines. I That's my realm as well. I love being creative, so I have my processes, but the designing is the most pressure, depending on the deadline. Just because I like things to be awesome, and I want my
Right.
producers to be happy. So it's always there's I always say it at the end, even though the process is difficult, there's never a bad note. So producers, that's their job. Help us get to yes, help us get to air, and it's going to look the best. My job as a designer is to flush things out and get to a point where the producers are happy and the network executives are happy and they sign off. So as a designer, it's a little bit of a different process. You go through that, and it's like this emotional roller coaster and designing and notes, and eventually it gets delivered and it's amazing. And it's not just me. It's a combined effort of myself and the production team. And I think that's the most rewarding aspect of the job for me, is knowing in the end I've done my best. We've gone through the process. We've delivered a graphic or something that executives are happy with, and if it gets ratings, then then we're all happy.
For more information on Erin, what he's been up to, what he's working on, and for visual effects, visit his website, which is erintgavin.com. That's ERINTGavin.com.
Be sure to follow Why the Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and check out our YouTube channel for some additional great Why content. If you're so inclined, please leave us a review and let us know how we're doing.
Today's show was produced by myself and Heidi Hedquist. Our reluctant executive producers are John Sauvé and Sandy Stone. Our graphic designer is Samantha Mustonen. Our intern is Randy Jeanette. The theme song was performed by the Electrosynth-No-Magnetic Polyphonic Orchestra. This one's for Philippe. Thanks for joining us. Flash, we're coming home.
Nigel, is that you? Are you here, Nigel?